I don't care what you think you know about air traffic control. You need to step back and let qualified personnel handle this emergency. Kyle Garrett's voice cut through the tense atmosphere of Dallas-Fort Worth's TRACON facility like a blade as he stared at the 28-year-old black woman coordinating the emergency response. Simone Washington sat at her radar scope, managing multiple aircraft frequencies with surgical precision, while a commercial airliner reported engine failure with 180 souls on board. The other controllers exchanged uncertain glances. Another case of someone getting in over their head during a crisis, they assumed, watching Kyle assert authority over what appeared to be a junior controller who didn't understand protocol. But then something extraordinary happened. Simone's calm professionalism never wavered. When she turned to look directly at Kyle, there was something in her dark eyes that made his confident expression freeze. American 447, descend and maintain 3,000 vectors for emergency approach runway 18R, she said with absolute authority. Kyle's hand stopped halfway to his headset as every controller in the facility stared at him with growing concern. Because everyone was realizing that Kyle had just challenged exactly the wrong person during exactly the wrong moment. Terminal Radar Approach Control Facility at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport hummed with the controlled intensity that characterized one of the busiest airspace sectors in the world. Banks of radar screens cast green glows across the faces of air traffic controllers, each managing a complex three-dimensional puzzle of aircraft moving through the sky at hundreds of miles per hour. At Sector 12, Simone Washington sat with the calm focus that had made her one of the most respected controllers in the facility. At 28, she possessed an almost supernatural ability to maintain spatial awareness of dozens of aircraft simultaneously while communicating with pilots in the crisp, precise language that kept commercial aviation running safely and efficiently. Her dark skin seemed to glow in the reflected light of her radar scope, and her natural hair was pulled back in a style that was both professional and authentically her own. She wore the standard TRACON uniform, dark blue polo shirt with FAA insignia, but carried herself with a confidence that suggested she was more than comfortable with the life-and-death responsibilities that came with managing air traffic in one of America's most complex airspace environments. United 892, contact departure 124.9, good day, she said into her headset, her voice carrying the automatic authority that pilots had learned to trust completely. The Boeing 737 was just one of 43 aircraft currently in her sector, each requiring constant monitoring and precise routing to maintain the intricate ballet of commercial aviation. Tuesday afternoon shifts at DFW were typically challenging, with arrival and departure traffic creating complex patterns that demanded absolute precision from controllers. But today was about to become significantly more complicated in ways that no one in the facility could have anticipated. TRACON, this is American 447 Heavy, declaring emergency. We have engine failure and need immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport. The transmission cut through the routine chatter like a knife, instantly transforming the atmosphere in the control room. Emergency declarations were rare, but required immediate, coordinated responses that could mean the difference between safe landings and catastrophic accidents. Simone's training kicked in automatically as she processed the information. American 447 was a Boeing 777 inbound from Los Angeles with approximately 180 passengers and crew. Engine failure in a wide-body aircraft was serious, but manageable with proper air traffic control coordination. American 447, Squawk 7700, say souls on board and fuel remaining, she responded immediately, her voice remaining calm, while her hands moved across the control panel to begin clearing airspace and coordinating emergency procedures. 180 souls on board, fuel for approximately 45 minutes at current consumption rate, came the pilot's reply, his voice tight with controlled stress, but maintaining the professionalism that characterized commercial aviation even in crisis situations. Kyle Garrett, a controller from Sector 8 who had been monitoring the situation from across the room, suddenly appeared behind Simone's position. At 34, Kyle had 8 years of experience at DFW TRACON, but his expertise was primarily in routine traffic management rather than emergency coordination. Washington, you need to transfer that emergency to someone with more experience, Kyle said loudly enough for other controllers to hear. "This is too complex for your skill level." Simone continued working without looking up from her scope, her fingers rapidly inputting commands while she maintained radio contact with American 447. American 447, turn right heading 090, descend and maintain 5,000 vectors for straight-in approach runway 18 right. Right turn 090, descending to 5,000 American 447. The pilot responded immediately, his compliance indicating complete confidence in the controller providing vectors. Kyle moved closer to Simone's position, his body language becoming more aggressive as he attempted to assert authority over the situation. "Washington, I'm telling you to transfer that aircraft to a senior controller. You're not qualified to handle this type of emergency." For the first time since the emergency had begun, Simone turned to look directly at Kyle, her dark eyes holding his gaze with a steadiness that made him unconsciously step back. "Garrett, I need you to clear Sector 9 and coordinate with ground control for emergency equipment positioning," she said with quiet authority. "This aircraft needs clear airspace and prepared emergency response." The instruction was delivered with such natural command authority that Kyle found himself momentarily confused about who was giving orders to whom. "I don't take instructions from you, Washington," Kyle replied, his voice carrying the defensive aggression of someone whose authority had been challenged in a way he hadn't expected. Other controllers in the facility were beginning to notice the confrontation, their attention divided between their own traffic responsibilities and the obviously inappropriate power struggle developing during an active emergency situation. Simone returned her attention to the radar scope, her professionalism never wavering despite Kyle's interference. "American 447, runway 18 right is clear. Winds 180 at 8 knots, emergency equipment is positioning. Runway 18 right, winds 180 at 8, we're configured for landing. American 447. Kyle's face was flushing with frustration as he realized that Simone was completely ignoring his attempts to take control of the situation. In his 8 years at the facility, he had never encountered a controller who didn't defer to his assertions of authority. But what Kyle didn't realize was that every word he spoke was being recorded by the facility's mandatory monitoring systems, and his interference with emergency operations was about to have consequences he never imagined. The tension in the TRACON facility was becoming palpable as other controllers began to realize that Kyle Garrett was actively interfering with emergency operations being conducted by Simone Washington. The situation was unprecedented. Controllers were trained to support each other during emergencies, not create additional complications through internal power struggles. Supervisor Marcus Reynolds, who had been monitoring the situation from the operations center, approached Simone's sector with growing concern. As shift supervisor, he was responsible for ensuring that emergency procedures were followed properly and that nothing interfered with the safety of aircraft under DFW's control. "What's the situation with American 447? Reynolds asked, addressing his question to Simone while pointedly ignoring Kyle's continued presence at her workstation. "Engine failure on approach, 180 souls on board. Currently vectored for straight-in approach to runway 18 right," Simone replied, without taking her eyes off the radar scope. "Emergency equipment is positioned. Airspace is clear. Aircraft is stable on final approach." Her response demonstrated the kind of comprehensive situational awareness that supervisors valued in their most competent controllers. Every critical detail was immediately available and accurately communicated. Kyle, however, seemed determined to insert himself into the conversation, despite having no official role in the emergency response. "Supervisor Reynolds, I've been trying to get Washington to transfer this emergency to a more experienced controller. This situation is beyond her capabilities." Reynolds turned to look at Kyle with obvious confusion. "Garrett, Washington is handling the emergency exactly according to protocol. Why would she transfer an aircraft she's managing successfully?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, forcing Kyle to articulate his concerns in a way that would reveal the actual basis for his interference. She doesn't have the experience for this type of emergency," Kyle stammered, suddenly realizing that he couldn't specify exactly what qualified him as more capable of managing the situation than Simone. Meanwhile, Simone continued her coordination with American 447, her communications demonstrating the kind of technical expertise that Kyle apparently didn't recognize or appreciate. American 447, you're cleared for ILS approach runway 18 right. Contact tower 126.55 at the marker, she transmitted with perfect precision. Cleared ILS 18 right, tower 126.55 at the marker, American 447. The handoff to tower control was executed flawlessly, indicating that the emergency aircraft was now in the final phase of approach, with all necessary preparations completed successfully. Kyle watched the smooth transfer with growing frustration, unable to identify any errors or deficiencies in Simone's handling of the situation. His interference was beginning to look less like professional concern and more like personal antagonism. "How long have you been working emergency procedures, Washington?" Kyle asked, his question designed to challenge her experience rather than gather information. For the first time since the emergency had begun, Simone turned her full attention to Kyle, her expression showing a mixture of patience and steel that suggested she was done tolerating his interference. "Garrett, how many engine failure emergencies have you handled in wide-body aircraft?" she asked in return, her voice carrying a precision that made the question sound more like a professional evaluation than casual conversation. Kyle's face showed uncertainty as he processed her counter-question. "I've handled several emergency situations in my 8 years here. How many wide-body engine failures specifically?" Simone pressed, her dark eyes holding his gaze with unwavering intensity. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Kyle realized he couldn't provide a specific answer that would support his claims of superior experience. Supervisor Reynolds was watching the exchange with growing understanding of the dynamics at play. In his 15 years managing air traffic operations, he had developed a keen ability to identify when personality conflicts were interfering with professional performance. "Washington, what's your experience with this type of emergency?" Reynolds asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer would be more comprehensive than Kyle's. "I've handled 47 engine failure emergencies in commercial aircraft over the past 6 years, Simone replied without hesitation. 12 of those involved wide-body aircraft with passenger loads over 150. The specificity of her response sent a chill through Kyle's confidence. Those numbers represented extensive experience with exactly the type of situation they were currently managing. "And your training background?" Reynolds continued, his questions clearly designed to establish Simone's qualifications in front of Kyle and other controllers who were listening. "FAA Academy Honor Graduate, specialized training in emergency procedures and multi-aircraft coordination, annual recertification in crisis management protocols," Simone replied with the same matter-of-fact precision. Kyle was beginning to look like someone who had walked into a trap of his own making. His attempts to question Simone's qualifications were revealing that she possessed more relevant experience and training than he had initially assumed. "Furthermore," Simone continued, her voice taking on a tone that suggested she was done being polite about Kyle's interference, "Garrett's questions and interruptions during active emergency operations represent a violation of FAA safety protocols and facility operating procedures." The statement hit Kyle like a physical blow. Interfering with emergency operations was a serious infraction that could result in suspension or termination of his controller certification. Supervisor Reynolds was now looking at Kyle with obvious concern and growing disapproval. "Garrett, is there a specific operational reason why you believe Washington should transfer this emergency?" The question forced Kyle to confront the uncomfortable truth that his interference was based on assumptions rather than professional assessment. What Kyle was about to discover would expose not just his own incompetence, but a pattern of behavior that had been undermining operations for months. As American 447 continued its emergency approach under Simone's expert guidance, the atmosphere in the TRACON facility had shifted from routine operations to something more complex and uncomfortable. Other controllers were beginning to pay attention to the confrontation between Kyle and Simone, sensing that they were witnessing something that went beyond normal workplace dynamics. Controller Jennifer Chen, who worked Sector 15 adjacent to Simone's position, had been quietly observing Kyle's behavior with growing concern. In her 4 years at DFW TRACON, she had noticed patterns in Kyle's interactions that she had never formally documented, but that now seemed relevant to the current situation. "Marcus," Jennifer said quietly to Supervisor Reynolds, "I think you should know that this isn't the first time Kyle has questioned Simone's handling of complex situations." Reynolds turned his attention to Jennifer, his expression showing professional interest in information that might explain the inappropriate behavior he was witnessing. "What do you mean?" Reynolds asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to suspect broader issues were at play. Over the past 6 months, Kyle has consistently challenged Simone's decisions during high-complexity traffic situations, Jennifer explained carefully. He's never questioned male controllers with similar experience levels, and he's never interfered with operations being conducted by white female controllers. The implications of Jennifer's observation settled over the conversation like a toxic cloud. If her assessment was accurate, Kyle's interference wasn't based on professional concerns about emergency procedures. It was based on biases that had been affecting operations for months. Simone, meanwhile, was demonstrating exactly why Kyle's concerns were unfounded. Her coordination of the American 447 emergency had been textbook perfect, with every communication precise and every decision appropriate for the situation. "Tower, American 447 is 3 miles final. Emergency equipment standing by," she transmitted to the control tower, ensuring that all necessary preparations were completed for the aircraft's arrival. "American 447 Tower, runway 18 right, cleared to land, emergency equipment in position," came the tower controller's immediate response. The smooth coordination between controllers demonstrated the kind of professional teamwork that made complex aviation operations possible, contrasting sharply with Kyle's disruptive behavior. Kyle, however, seemed determined to continue his interference, despite the obvious success of Simone's emergency management. "Washington, you should have coordinated that landing clearance through me as senior controller on duty." The statement was so factually incorrect that several controllers turned to stare at Kyle with open disbelief. Tower coordination didn't flow through sector controllers, and Kyle wasn't the senior controller on duty regardless. Simone turned to face Kyle directly, her expression showing the kind of analytical precision that he had been failing to recognize throughout their interaction. "Garrett, in your 8 years at this facility, have you ever been designated as senior controller on duty?" she asked with calm professionalism. Kyle's face flushed as he realized that his claim was easily verifiable and completely false. "I have seniority over controllers with less experience." "That's not what I asked," Simone interrupted gently but firmly. "I asked if you've ever been designated as senior controller on duty. It's a specific position with specific qualifications." The precision of her question forced Kyle to confront the fact that he had never held the position he was claiming, and that his attempts to assert authority were based on assumptions rather than actual organizational hierarchy. Supervisor Reynolds was now watching the exchange with the kind of analytical attention that suggested he was cataloging information for formal review. "Garrett, what is your current position classification?" "I'm a developmental controller level 3, Kyle replied reluctantly, realizing that his classification was actually lower than what he had been implying. "And Washington's classification?" Reynolds continued. Kyle's silence was answer enough, but Simone provided the information clearly. "Certified Professional Controller Level 5, specialized in complex traffic management and emergency operations." The hierarchy was now clear to everyone present. Simone held a higher classification than Kyle, with specialized qualifications in exactly the type of operations he had been questioning. Jennifer Chen leaned closer to Reynolds and spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. "Marcus, Kyle has also been making comments about controllers who don't belong in high-stress positions. I've been documenting instances where his behavior seemed based on personal bias rather than professional assessment." Reynolds nodded grimly, understanding that Jennifer's observations suggested patterns of discriminatory behavior that could affect the safety and effectiveness of air traffic operations. Meanwhile, Simone was monitoring the final phase of American 447's emergency landing. Her attention focused on ensuring that the situation concluded safely, despite Kyle's continued interference. "American 447, Contact ground 121.65. Emergency equipment will escort you to the gate, she transmitted, completing the emergency coordination with the same professionalism she had maintained throughout. Ground 121.65, thanks for the excellent vectors, American 447, came the pilot's response, his gratitude recognizing the quality of air traffic control services he had received. The successful completion of the emergency should have ended Kyle's interference, but instead he seemed determined to continue challenging Simone's authority even after her competence had been demonstrated conclusively. Washington, we need to debrief this emergency properly. I have concerns about your decision-making during critical phases, Kyle announced, apparently oblivious to how his continued criticism was being received by other controllers and supervision. Simone looked at Kyle with the kind of analytical assessment that suggested she was evaluating him through professional filters he couldn't begin to understand. Garrett, I'm curious about something, she said with the same unsettling calm that had characterized her emergency coordination. In your assessment of my performance, can you identify specific decisions that violated emergency procedures or FAA protocols? The question was delivered with surgical precision, designed to force Kyle to articulate concrete concerns rather than vague criticisms. What Kyle was about to reveal would expose not just his own bias, but a systematic problem that had been compromising air traffic safety for months. Kyle Garrett's face showed increasing discomfort as Simone's question hung in the air, demanding that he provide specific technical justifications for his criticism of her emergency handling. Around them, the TRACON facility continued its normal operations, but an increasing number of controllers were becoming aware of the confrontation that was developing between Kyle and one of their most respected colleagues. Your vectors were aggressive, Kyle finally replied, his voice lacking the confidence he had displayed earlier. You should have given the aircraft more time to prepare for approach. Simone's expression didn't change, but her response demonstrated the kind of technical expertise that Kyle apparently didn't possess. American 447 was experiencing fuel consumption increase due to engine failure. Extended vectors would have increased fuel burn and potentially created a more dangerous situation. The straight-in approach I provided was optimal for their emergency condition. Controller Martinez, who worked the adjacent sector, had been listening to the exchange with growing amazement at Kyle's persistence in challenging decisions that were clearly appropriate and expertly executed. Kyle, Martinez interjected carefully, Simone's vectors were textbook perfect for that type of emergency. I've never seen smoother coordination of an engine failure approach. Kyle turned to face Martinez with obvious irritation. Martinez, this doesn't concern you. Washington and I are conducting a professional debrief of emergency procedures. The phrase professional debrief was so inaccurate that several controllers exchanged glances of disbelief. Professional debriefs were conducted by supervisors or designated safety officers, not by peer controllers with obvious personal agendas. Supervisor Reynolds, who had been monitoring the situation while managing other facility operations, decided that Kyle's behavior had crossed the line from inappropriate to potentially dangerous. Garrett, I need you to return to your assigned sector, Reynolds said with unmistakable authority. Your interference with emergency operations and continued disruption of facility operations ends now. Kyle's reaction was immediate and revealing. Instead of accepting the direct order from his supervisor, he seemed to double down on his confrontation with Simone. Reynolds, I'm trying to ensure that emergency procedures are followed properly. Washington's handling of this situation demonstrates why certain controllers shouldn't be assigned to high-stress operations. The phrase certain controllers carried obvious implications that made the discriminatory basis of Kyle's behavior impossible to ignore. Simone stood up from her position for the first time since the emergency had begun, her movement fluid and controlled, but carrying an authority that immediately commanded attention from everyone in the vicinity. Garrett, she said, her voice taking on a tone that several controllers had never heard before. I want to make sure I understand your position clearly. Are you suggesting that I shouldn't handle emergency operations because of my gender, my race, or some other characteristic that you believe disqualifies me? The directness of her question forced Kyle to confront the actual basis of his interference, and his response would reveal whether his behavior was based on professional concerns or personal bias. I'm suggesting that controllers need to have the right temperament for emergency situations, Kyle replied, his choice of words revealing more than he probably intended. Temperament, Simone repeated thoughtfully, as if she were analyzing the word for hidden meanings. Can you describe the temperament characteristics that you believe are necessary for emergency air traffic control? Kyle was beginning to look like a man who had walked into a trap that was closing around him with each word he spoke. Controllers need to be calm under pressure, decisive, able to communicate clearly with pilots, he stammered, apparently realizing that his answer described exactly the qualities Simone had demonstrated during the American 447 emergency. And in your assessment, did I demonstrate those qualities during the emergency we just handled? Simone asked with the same analytical precision. Kyle's silence stretched uncomfortably as he processed the contradiction between his criticism and the evidence of Simone's performance. Jennifer Chen, who had been documenting Kyle's behavior patterns for months, decided that the current situation required her to speak up more directly. Kyle, she said loudly enough for other controllers to hear, in the 6 months I've been observing your interactions, you've questioned the emergency handling of every female controller and every controller of color in this facility. You've never questioned the decisions of white male controllers, even when they've made actual errors. The accusation hit the facility like a bombshell, forcing everyone present to confront the possibility that they had been witnessing systematic discriminatory behavior rather than isolated incidents. Kyle's face went pale as he realized that his pattern of behavior had been noticed and documented by his colleagues. I don't discriminate against anyone, he protested weakly, but his denial lacked any conviction. Simone was studying Kyle with the kind of analytical intensity that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Garrett, I'm curious about your training background. What specialized qualifications do you hold for evaluating emergency procedures? The question was designed to establish whether Kyle actually possessed the expertise necessary to critique her performance, and his answer would reveal the foundation, or lack thereof, for his continued interference. I have standard TRACON certification, Kyle replied reluctantly. Any specialized emergency training, crisis management certification, multi-aircraft coordination qualifications? Simone pressed. Kyle's continued silence provided the answer that everyone needed to understand the actual relationship between his qualifications and his criticism of Simone's performance. Supervisor Reynolds was now looking at Kyle with the kind of expression that suggested serious disciplinary action was being contemplated. Garrett, report to my office immediately. Your behavior today constitutes interference with emergency operations and potential workplace harassment. But what Kyle was about to discover about Simone's real position in the facility would destroy every assumption he had made about authority and hierarchy. As Supervisor Reynolds escorted Kyle toward the administrative offices for what was clearly going to be a serious disciplinary conversation, the atmosphere in the TRACON facility began to shift in ways that would fundamentally change how everyone understood the hierarchy and expertise distribution among their colleagues. Simone returned to her radar scope, but instead of resuming normal traffic management, she began coordinating with approach controls at surrounding airports in a way that demonstrated knowledge and authority that most controllers in the facility had never witnessed. Houston Center, this is DFW TRACON. We need to coordinate special handling for American 447's diversion alternate, she transmitted on a frequency that connected her directly to regional air traffic coordination centers. The response came immediately. DFW TRACON Houston Center, we have American 447's alternate coordination standing by. What's your recommendation for regional traffic flow adjustments? Controllers throughout the facility turned to listen as Simone began demonstrating expertise in regional traffic coordination that went far beyond standard TRACON responsibilities. Houston Center, recommend we implement Flow Program Delta 7 for westbound departures to minimize impact on emergency aircraft recovery operations. American 447 will need extended ground time for inspection and passenger handling. Flow Program Delta 7 was an advanced traffic management procedure that most controllers had heard of but few had ever seen implemented. It required coordination between multiple facilities and demonstrated authority that extended well beyond individual sector management. Jennifer Chen was staring at Simone with open amazement. "Simone, how do you have access to regional flow programs? That's typically handled by Operations Center Management." Simone smiled slightly, the first indication of anything other than complete professionalism she had shown since Kyle's interference began. "I have some additional responsibilities beyond sector management." Controller Martinez leaned closer, his curiosity clearly engaged. "What kind of additional responsibilities?" Instead of answering directly, Simone continued her coordination with external facilities, demonstrating capabilities that were becoming impossible to explain through standard controller classifications. "Atlanta Center, this is DFW TRACON. We're implementing special procedures for American 447 recovery. Please coordinate with American operations for crew scheduling and aircraft positioning." DFW TRACON, Atlanta Center. "We have American Ops on conference. What's your authority for special procedure implementation?" Simone's response would reveal information that would change everyone's understanding of who they had been working alongside for months. "Atlanta Center. This is Washington TRACON Supervisory Authority Designation, Sierra November 77. I have full authority for special procedure implementation and regional coordination." The silence that followed was deafening. Sierra November 77 was a designation that indicated senior supervisory authority at the facility level, a position that required extensive training, experience, and certification that went far beyond normal controller qualifications. Martinez was staring at Simone with complete bewilderment. "Simone, what is TRACON Supervisory Authority? I've never heard that designation." Jennifer Chen was pulling up facility organizational charts on her computer, her expression showing growing amazement as she discovered information that explained everything they had witnessed. "Oh my God," Jennifer whispered, loud enough for nearby controllers to hear. "Simone, you're listed here as Senior Operations Supervisor for TRACON Coordination. That's a management position above the shift supervisors." The revelation hit the facility like an earthquake. Senior Operations Supervisor was a position that carried authority over operational procedures, personnel management, and facility coordination with external organizations. Simone continued her coordination activities, apparently unconcerned by the growing awareness of her actual position within the organizational hierarchy. "American Operations. This is DFW TRACON Senior Ops. We need crew scheduling coordination for American 447 recovery. The aircraft will be out of service for inspection and passengers will require accommodation." DFW TRACON American Ops. "We have Senior Ops Authority confirmed. What's your recommendation for crew and passenger handling?" The casual acknowledgement of her authority by external organizations demonstrated that Simone's position was well established and recognized throughout the aviation industry. Controller Davis, who had been working at DFW for 12 years, approached Simone's position with obvious confusion and concern. "Simone, if you're Senior Operations Supervisor, why are you working sector traffic instead of managing from the Operations Center?" Simone turned to face the growing group of controllers who had gathered around her position, her expression showing a mixture of patience and something that might have been disappointment. "I work sector traffic periodically to maintain currency and to observe facility operations from the controller perspective," she explained calmly. "It's part of my supervisory responsibilities to understand how policies and procedures affect daily operations." The implications were staggering. Simone hadn't just been handling routine traffic management. She had been conducting observational assessment of facility operations while maintaining her certification as an active controller. "How long have you held this position?" Martinez asked, his voice showing the amazement that everyone was feeling. 18 months, Simone replied. "I was promoted from shift supervisor after completing advanced training in regional coordination and facility management." Jennifer Chen was reviewing Simone's personnel file on her computer, her expression showing increasing respect and understanding. "Simone, your qualifications are incredible. Advanced degrees in aviation management and air traffic systems, FAA Leadership Development Program graduate, certified in emergency management and crisis coordination, The list of qualifications continued, revealing that Simone possessed expertise that far exceeded anything Kyle Garrett had assumed when he began questioning her authority. "And Kyle's behavior today?" Davis asked, beginning to understand the full scope of what they had witnessed. Simone's expression became more serious, taking on the authority of someone whose responsibilities included ensuring operational safety and professional standards. Kyle's interference with emergency operations and his pattern of discriminatory behavior toward female and minority controllers represents a systematic problem that requires immediate administrative action. But what the controllers were about to learn would reveal that Kyle's discrimination had been compromising flight safety for months. The revelation of Simone's true position had transformed the atmosphere in the TRACON facility from routine operations to something approaching an organizational reckoning. Controllers who had worked alongside her for months were processing the reality that they had been witnessing systematic discrimination directed at someone whose authority and qualifications far exceeded those of her attacker. Simone moved to a supervisory workstation that most controllers had assumed was reserved for shift management, but her access to advanced systems and databases revealed the true extent of her operational oversight responsibilities. "I want to show you something that explains why today's incident is particularly concerning," she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone conducting a formal briefing rather than casual conversation. She pulled up a comprehensive database that tracked controller performance, incident reports, and operational efficiency metrics across the entire facility. The level of access required supervisory authorization that confirmed her senior position, beyond any doubt. "Over the past 8 months, we've been tracking patterns in workplace interactions that affect operational safety and professional standards," Simone explained, as data populated her screen. "The results are troubling." The database showed incident reports, interpersonal conflicts, and performance issues, organized by demographic categories that revealed systematic disparities in how different controllers were treated by their colleagues. Jennifer Chen leaned closer to examine the data, her expression showing growing concern as patterns became visible. "Simone, this shows that female controllers and controllers of color are questioned about their decisions at rates over 300% higher than white male controllers." "That's correct," Simone confirmed. "And the questioning typically occurs during high-stress situations where additional challenges can compromise safety and efficiency." Controller Martinez studied the data with professional concern. "This suggests that biased behavior isn't just affecting individual controllers, it's affecting operational performance." Simone nodded grimly. "Kyle Garrett appears in this database 47 times over the past 8 months, consistently challenging decisions made by controllers who don't match his demographic profile." The specificity of the data was devastating. Kyle's pattern of behavior was documented with timestamps, incident descriptions, and impact assessments that revealed systematic discrimination affecting multiple colleagues over an extended period. Furthermore, Simone continued, accessing additional records, his interference has contributed to operational delays, communication confusion, and stress responses that compromise the safety culture we work to maintain. She pulled up audio recordings from facility monitoring systems that documented Kyle's interactions with various controllers, creating an undeniable record of discriminatory behavior. The first recording played Kyle's voice questioning controller Patricia Williams during a complex weather situation. "Williams, you need to be more aggressive with those vectors. Female controllers sometimes hesitate when decisive action is needed." Several controllers winced at the obvious gender bias in Kyle's criticism, particularly since Patricia Williams was known for her excellent performance in challenging weather conditions. The second recording captured Kyle's interaction with controller Roberto Sanchez during a busy afternoon. "Sanchez, I think you should transfer that complex arrival sequence to someone with better English communication skills." The racist implications were unmistakable, especially since Roberto Sanchez had been born in Texas and spoke English as his native language. "How many controllers has Kyle targeted with this behavior?" Davis asked, his voice showing growing anger at the scope of discrimination they were discovering. "Based on documented incidents, Kyle has made discriminatory comments or inappropriate challenges toward 12 different controllers over 8 months, Simone replied, with clinical precision. All 12 controllers were either female, minority, or both. The systematic nature of Kyle's behavior was becoming undeniable, revealing that his interference with Simone's emergency handling was part of a much larger pattern of workplace discrimination. Jennifer Chen was reviewing additional data on her workstation, her expression showing professional outrage as she discovered more evidence. Simone, these records show that Kyle's interference has contributed to operational inefficiencies, costing thousands of dollars in delays and fuel consumption. That's why today's incident during an actual emergency represents an escalation that requires immediate action, Simone explained. Discriminatory behavior that interferes with emergency operations puts lives at risk. Controller Davis pulled up his own incident logs, apparently remembering situations he had witnessed, but hadn't previously recognized as systematic discrimination. I saw Kyle question Maria Rodriguez's traffic spacing last month, but I thought it was just professional discussion, Davis said with growing understanding. Now I realize it was part of this pattern. Simone accessed video surveillance from the facility's internal monitoring systems, showing Kyle's body language and positioning during interactions with different controllers. The visual evidence made his discriminatory behavior even more obvious. Notice how Kyle's physical positioning changes depending on who he's challenging, Simone pointed out as the video played. With white male controllers, he maintains respectful distance and professional posture. With female controllers and minorities, he uses aggressive positioning and intimidation tactics. The behavioral analysis was sophisticated and comprehensive, revealing that Simone possessed expertise in identifying and documenting discriminatory practices that went far beyond basic supervisory training. This level of analysis suggests specialized training in workplace discrimination identification, Martinez observed, his respect for Simone's capabilities continuing to grow. Part of my advanced supervisory certification included training in civil rights compliance, workplace harassment identification, and organizational behavior analysis, Simone explained. The FAA requires senior supervisors to maintain expertise in these areas to ensure safe and professional work environments. Controller Williams, who had been the subject of Kyle's recorded criticism, approached the group with obvious emotion. Simone, I had no idea that my experiences were being documented as part of a larger pattern. Kyle's comments made me question my own competence, even though my performance reviews were excellent. The psychological impact of Kyle's behavior was becoming clear. His discrimination hadn't just affected operational efficiency, it had undermined the confidence and job satisfaction of multiple professional controllers. That's exactly why this documentation is important, Simone replied with compassion and authority. Discriminatory behavior creates hostile work environments that affect both individual performance and overall safety culture. She accessed another database showing correlation between workplace harassment incidents and operational performance metrics, revealing that discrimination had measurable negative effects on air traffic safety. Facilities with higher rates of discriminatory behavior show increased error rates, communication breakdowns, and near-miss incidents, Simone explained, her data supporting the argument that Kyle's behavior represented a genuine safety concern. Jennifer Chen was reviewing Kyle's personnel file, her expression showing growing concern about information that had been overlooked or minimized by previous supervisors. Simone, Kyle's file shows 3 previous complaints about inappropriate workplace behavior, but they were all classified as personality conflicts rather than discrimination, Jennifer reported. That's a common pattern, Simone replied. Discriminatory behavior is often minimized or misclassified to avoid addressing systemic problems. She pulled up training records showing that Kyle had missed or failed multiple sessions on workplace diversity and civil rights compliance, suggesting that his discriminatory behavior was reinforced by lack of appropriate education. The combination of documented incidents, missed training, and continued escalation suggests that Kyle's behavior represents a significant liability for facility operations and legal compliance, Simone concluded. Controller Davis was studying the comprehensive documentation with professional amazement. Simone, this investigation is incredibly thorough. How long have you been gathering this evidence? The systematic data collection began when I noticed patterns in incident reports and employee complaints, Simone replied. My position requires me to identify and address factors that affect operational safety and workplace professionalism. The scope of Simone's investigation revealed that her role as senior operations supervisor involved responsibilities that most controllers had never fully understood, including oversight of organizational culture and professional standards. But what Simone was about to reveal would show that Kyle's discrimination had created legal liabilities that threatened the entire facility's operation. Stories like Simone's inspire people worldwide to stand up for workplace dignity. Let us know what country and city you're watching from, so we can see how far these powerful messages are reaching. The Tracon facility's break room had been transformed into an impromptu conference area as Simone continued her presentation of evidence documenting Kyle Garrett's systematic discriminatory behavior. What had begun as an emergency response had evolved into a comprehensive review of workplace culture and professional standards that would have far-reaching implications for facility operations. Supervisor Reynolds had returned from his initial disciplinary meeting with Kyle, his expression showing the grim satisfaction of someone who had just received confirmation of problems he had suspected but hadn't been able to document comprehensively. Simone, I need you to brief me on the full scope of what you've discovered, Reynolds said, settling into a chair and preparing to receive information that would likely require immediate action and potentially external reporting. Simone accessed a secure database that required additional authorization, revealing that her investigation had uncovered issues requiring coordination with federal oversight agencies. Marcus, Kyle's pattern of discriminatory behavior creates significant legal liability under federal civil rights laws that govern workplace conditions in aviation facilities, she began, her tone taking on the authority of someone delivering critical safety information. She displayed documentation showing that air traffic facilities were subject to Department of Transportation civil rights compliance requirements, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission oversight, and FAA workplace safety standards that prohibited discriminatory behavior. The Federal Aviation Administration has specific regulations requiring that air traffic facilities maintain professional work environments free from harassment and discrimination, Simone explained. Kyle's documented behavior represents violations that could result in federal investigation and potential facility sanctions. Reynolds was reviewing the documentation with growing concern, understanding that workplace discrimination in safety-critical aviation facilities carried consequences that extended far beyond individual personnel actions. What kind of federal sanctions are we potentially facing? Reynolds asked, though his expression suggested he suspected the answer would be serious. Facilities that fail to address systematic discrimination can face operational oversight restrictions, funding limitations, and in severe cases, certification review that could affect our authority to provide air traffic services, Simone replied with clinical precision. The implications were staggering. Air traffic facilities operated under federal certification that required compliance with safety and professional standards. Systematic discrimination could jeopardize the facility's ability to continue providing services to one of the nation's busiest airports. Jennifer Chen was reviewing federal regulations on her computer, her expression showing increasing concern as she discovered the scope of compliance requirements they were dealing with. Simone, these regulations require facilities to report patterns of discriminatory behavior to federal oversight agencies, Jennifer observed. Are we required to notify anyone about Kyle's behavior? The pattern of incidents I've documented triggers mandatory reporting requirements to both the FAA's Civil Rights Office and the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General, Simone confirmed. She accessed a prepared report that demonstrated she had been coordinating with federal oversight agencies throughout her investigation, ensuring that appropriate authorities were aware of developing problems. I've been working with FAA civil rights investigators for the past 6 weeks to document Kyle's behavior and ensure that our response meets federal compliance requirements, Simone explained. Controller Martinez was staring at the federal coordination documentation with amazement. Simone, you've been conducting a federal investigation while working normal controller shifts. Senior operations supervisors are required to coordinate with federal oversight when systematic problems affect facility operations, Simone replied. My position carries responsibilities for ensuring compliance with all applicable federal regulations. Reynolds was processing the reality that Simone had been managing a complex federal investigation while maintaining her normal supervisory duties and even working controller positions to gather first-hand evidence. The federal investigators are particularly concerned about Kyle's interference with emergency operations, Simone continued. Discriminatory behavior that affects air traffic safety represents violations of both civil rights laws and aviation safety regulations. She displayed correspondence from FAA investigators expressing serious concern about Kyle's pattern of behavior and its potential impact on operational safety and professional standards. Controller Williams, who had been listening to the federal implications with growing understanding, approached Simone with obvious gratitude and concern. Simone, does this mean that my experiences with Kyle's discrimination are being reviewed by federal investigators? She asked. Every documented incident involving Kyle's discriminatory behavior is being reviewed by federal civil rights investigators, Simone confirmed. Your experiences, along with those of other controllers, provide evidence of systematic problems that require federal oversight. The scope of the investigation was becoming clear. Kyle's behavior hadn't just affected individual controllers, it had created federal compliance issues that required comprehensive review and remediation. Davis was reviewing the federal reporting requirements, his expression showing professional concern about the implications for facility operations. What kind of changes will federal oversight require? He asked. The investigators are requiring comprehensive reforms to training programs, supervisory oversight, incident reporting procedures, and accountability systems, Simone replied. We're essentially implementing a new framework for ensuring professional workplace standards. She displayed a detailed remediation plan that had been developed in coordination with federal investigators, showing that the response to Kyle's behavior would transform how the facility managed workplace culture and professional standards. The plan includes mandatory bias training for all personnel, enhanced supervisory oversight of workplace interactions, independent review processes for discrimination complaints, and regular federal auditing of compliance, Simone explained. Reynolds was studying the remediation plan with the expression of someone understanding that his facility was about to undergo comprehensive transformation. How long will federal oversight continue? He asked. Initial oversight will continue for 18 months, with ongoing monitoring depending on our success in implementing required changes, Simone replied. The timeline suggested that Kyle's discriminatory behavior had created consequences that would affect facility operations for years to come, requiring sustained effort to rebuild professional standards and federal compliance. But what the controllers were about to learn would reveal that Simone's authority extended far beyond facility management. The moment had arrived for complete transparency about Simone Washington's role within the complex hierarchy of federal aviation operations. What had begun as Kyle Garrett's interference with emergency procedures had evolved into a comprehensive examination of her qualifications, authority, and the systematic problems she had been investigating for months. Supervisor Reynolds realized that the federal investigation Simone had been coordinating required him to understand the full scope of her position and responsibilities within the facility's organizational structure. Simone, I think it's time for complete disclosure about your role here, Reynolds said, his tone indicating that he understood they were dealing with complexities that went beyond routine supervisory authority. Simone nodded, apparently having anticipated that the revelation of Kyle's discrimination would require her to explain capabilities and authority that she had kept deliberately low profile during her observational assessment of facility operations. My official title is Senior Operations Supervisor for Tracon Systems Integration, she began, her voice taking on the formal tone of someone providing comprehensive briefing information. My responsibilities include oversight of operational procedures, federal compliance coordination, inter-facility liaison, and organizational culture management. She accessed her official personnel file through the secure system, displaying qualifications and authority designations that made several controllers realize they had been working alongside someone whose expertise far exceeded their previous understanding. I hold master's degrees in aviation management and organizational psychology, FAA Senior Executive Service Certification, and specialized training in civil rights compliance and workplace culture assessment, Simone continued, her credentials explaining the sophisticated analysis she had been conducting. Controller Martinez was studying her official organizational chart position, his expression showing amazement at the level of authority she actually possessed. Simone, this shows that your position carries oversight authority for multiple TRACON facilities across the Southwest region, he observed with growing respect. That's correct. My responsibilities extend beyond DFW to include coordination and compliance oversight for Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and Oklahoma City approach control facilities, Simone confirmed. The scope of her authority was far greater than anyone in the facility had realized, explaining her access to regional coordination systems and federal oversight databases. Jennifer Chen was reviewing Simone's educational background and professional certifications, her expression showing increasing understanding of the expertise that Kyle had been challenging. Your qualifications include specialized training in crisis management, federal compliance auditing, and organizational behavior analysis, Jennifer noted. You're essentially qualified to evaluate and reform entire air traffic facilities, which is exactly what I've been doing here for the past 18 months, Simone replied. DFW TRACON was selected for comprehensive culture assessment due to employee complaints and operational efficiency concerns. The revelation that the entire facility had been under systematic evaluation transformed everyone's understanding of recent events. Simone hadn't just been working normal controller shifts, she had been conducting a detailed assessment of workplace culture and professional standards. Reynolds was processing the implications of having a senior federal oversight official working routine traffic while evaluating facility operations. Simone, does this mean that everything we've been doing has been under federal review? He asked with understandable concern. The facility's operational procedures, safety culture, training programs, and workplace environment have all been under systematic assessment, Simone confirmed. My controller shift work provided direct observation of daily operations and interpersonal dynamics. Controller Davis was beginning to understand the sophisticated nature of the investigation that had been conducted around them without their awareness. So Kyle's discrimination against you wasn't just workplace harassment, it was discriminatory behavior directed at a federal oversight official, he asked. Kyle's behavior demonstrated exactly the kind of systematic bias that federal investigators were concerned about, Simone replied. His treatment of me, along with his documented discrimination against other controllers, provided comprehensive evidence of cultural problems requiring intervention. The irony was devastating. Kyle had targeted for discrimination the very person whose job was to identify and address discriminatory behavior in air traffic facilities. Williams approached Simone with obvious gratitude and professional respect. Does this mean that federal investigators will take action to prevent other controllers from experiencing what I went through with Kyle? The federal oversight plan includes comprehensive reforms designed to eliminate discriminatory behavior and create accountable professional work environments, Simone assured her. Your experiences, along with those of other affected controllers, will drive systematic changes that protect everyone's right to professional treatment. She accessed the detailed federal remediation plan that had been developed based on her assessment findings, showing that Kyle's behavior had triggered comprehensive facility transformation. The plan includes mandatory bias training, enhanced supervisory oversight, independent discrimination complaint processes, regular federal auditing, and accountability measures that ensure professional standards are maintained, Simone explained. Martinez was studying the remediation timeline, his expression showing appreciation for the thoroughness of the federal response. This is essentially a complete overhaul of facility culture and management practices, he observed. Federal investigators determined that systematic discrimination requires systematic solutions, Simone replied. Individual accountability is important, but institutional change is essential to prevent future problems. Reynolds was beginning to understand that Simone's presence at the facility represented far more than routine supervisory oversight. What happens to Kyle now that federal investigators have documented his discriminatory behavior? He asked. Kyle's case will be reviewed by federal civil rights investigators, FAA disciplinary authorities, and potentially Department of Justice civil rights enforcement, Simone replied with clinical precision. The scope of accountability Kyle was facing reflected the serious nature of discriminatory behavior in federal aviation facilities, where professional standards were critical to public safety. Furthermore, Simone continued, his interference with emergency operations during today's incident represents additional violations that will be reviewed by aviation safety investigators. What happened next would end Kyle's career and transform air traffic control culture across the entire region. The administrative conference room at DFW TRACON had been transformed into a federal oversight coordination center as representatives from multiple agencies arrived to address the systematic discrimination that Simone's investigation had uncovered. What had begun as Kyle Garrett's interference with emergency operations had evolved into a comprehensive federal review of workplace culture and professional standards. Federal Aviation Administration civil rights investigator Dr. Maria Santos entered the facility with the authority of someone whose recommendations could determine the future of air traffic operations at one of America's busiest airports. Her presence signified that Kyle's discriminatory behavior had triggered federal oversight that would have lasting consequences for facility operations. Ms. Washington, Dr. Santos said as she approached Simone's position, your documentation of systematic discriminatory behavior has provided federal investigators with comprehensive evidence of civil rights violations requiring immediate intervention. Simone stood to greet the federal investigator, her professional bearing reflecting the senior authority she had been exercising throughout her assessment of facility culture. Dr. Santos, I have additional evidence that Kyle's interference with emergency operations today represents an escalation of discriminatory behavior that directly affects aviation safety, Simone reported, her tone carrying the precision of someone providing critical safety information. Dr. Santos reviewed the documentation that Simone had prepared, her expression showing the kind of professional concern that suggested serious federal consequences were being contemplated. The combination of systematic workplace discrimination and interference with emergency air traffic operations creates liability under both civil rights laws and aviation safety regulations, Dr. Santos observed. We're dealing with violations that require comprehensive federal response. Meanwhile, Kyle Garrett had been escorted to a separate conference room where he was facing questioning by multiple federal investigators whose authority extended far beyond facility disciplinary action. His confident demeanor from earlier in the day had been completely replaced by visible panic as he began to understand the scope of federal accountability he was facing. Department of Transportation, Inspector General Investigator James Richardson was reviewing the audio recordings of Kyle's interference with Simone's emergency coordination, his expression showing professional outrage at behavior that had compromised safety operations. Mr. Garrett, federal regulations strictly prohibit interference with emergency air traffic operations, Richardson explained with the authority of someone whose investigations could result in criminal charges. Your documented harassment of the controller managing American 447's emergency approach represents violations of multiple federal safety laws. Kyle's attempts to minimize his behavior were immediately challenged by the comprehensive evidence that Simone had gathered during her months-long investigation. I was just trying to ensure proper procedures were followed, Kyle claimed weakly, but his justification was contradicted by audio recordings that documented his discriminatory language and inappropriate interference. Mr. Garrett, the evidence shows that you specifically targeted female controllers and controllers of color for questioning and harassment while never challenging the decisions of white male controllers with similar or lower qualifications, Dr. Santos stated with clinical precision. She displayed the statistical analysis that Simone had compiled, showing that Kyle's pattern of behavior was so systematically biased that it could not be explained by professional concerns or random workplace conflicts. Back in the main facility, controllers were gathering to receive briefings about the federal investigation and the comprehensive reforms that would be implemented to address systematic discrimination. Simone was addressing the assembled controllers with the authority of someone whose position carried responsibility for transforming organizational culture. The federal investigation has confirmed that discriminatory behavior at this facility created hostile work environments that affected both individual controllers and overall operational safety, she announced to the group. Controller Williams stepped forward, her experience with Kyle's discrimination having been validated by federal investigators as evidence of systematic civil rights violations. What changes will be implemented to prevent other controllers from experiencing the harassment that Kyle subjected us to? She asked with obvious concern for her colleagues' future experiences. Federal oversight will require comprehensive reforms, including mandatory bias training for all personnel, enhanced supervisory accountability for workplace culture, independent review processes for discrimination complaints, and regular federal auditing of compliance with civil rights requirements, Simone explained. The scope of changes reflected the serious nature of systematic discrimination in safety-critical aviation facilities, where professional standards were essential to public safety and operational effectiveness. Jennifer Chen was reviewing the federal remediation timeline, her expression showing appreciation for the thoroughness of the oversight response. These changes will essentially transform how we handle workplace interactions and professional development, she observed. That's exactly the goal, Simone confirmed. Federal investigators determined that systematic discrimination requires systematic solutions that address both individual accountability and institutional culture. Meanwhile, Kyle's disciplinary review was concluding with consequences that reflected the serious nature of his violations of federal civil rights and aviation safety laws. Mr. Garrett, your controller certification is being revoked pending completion of federal civil rights investigation, Inspector Richardson announced with finality. You are permanently barred from air traffic control facilities, and your security clearance is being terminated immediately. The consequences were swift and comprehensive, reflecting federal determination to eliminate discriminatory behavior from safety-critical aviation operations. Furthermore, your case is being referred to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division for potential criminal prosecution under federal civil rights laws, Dr. Santos added, her statement indicating that Kyle's behavior could result in criminal charges beyond administrative penalties. Kyle's career in aviation was over, but more importantly, his discriminatory behavior had triggered federal reforms that would protect countless future controllers from similar harassment and discrimination. But the transformation Simone had initiated would extend far beyond one facility to reshape air traffic control culture across the entire nation. 6 weeks after the incident that had exposed Kyle Garrett's systematic discrimination and revealed Simone Washington's true authority within federal aviation oversight, the transformation of DFW TRACON had become a model for addressing workplace discrimination in safety-critical aviation facilities across the nation. Federal Aviation Administration Administrator Jennifer Walsh stood before an assembly of air traffic controllers, supervisors, and federal oversight officials in the facility's main operations area, her presence signifying the national importance of the reforms that had been implemented. The systematic discrimination uncovered at DFW TRACON represented problems that exist throughout the air traffic control system, Administrator Walsh announced to the gathered personnel. The comprehensive reforms implemented here will become the standard for all FAA facilities nationwide. Simone, now openly operating in her role as Senior Operations Supervisor and Federal Oversight Coordinator, had become the primary architect of reforms that would affect air traffic operations across the country. The culture transformation we've achieved here demonstrates that systematic discrimination can be eliminated through comprehensive training, enhanced accountability, and genuine commitment to professional standards. Simone addressed the assembly with the authority of someone whose work had created lasting change. The reforms implemented at DFW had exceeded all expectations for their effectiveness in creating professional work environments and improving operational safety. Discrimination complaints had dropped to zero, employee satisfaction had increased dramatically, and operational efficiency had improved as controllers worked in environments free from harassment and bias. Controller Williams, whose experiences with Kyle's discrimination had provided crucial evidence for federal investigators, had become an advocate for the new accountability systems. The independent review process for workplace concerns has created an environment where controllers can report problems without fear of retaliation, she explained during a presentation to visiting supervisors from other facilities. We finally have systems that protect professional standards and individual dignity. Jennifer Chen had been promoted to Assistant Operations Supervisor, her documentation of Kyle's discriminatory behavior having demonstrated the kind of professional integrity that federal investigators valued in facility leadership. The bias recognition training has been transformative, Chen reported to Administrator Walsh. Controllers are now equipped to identify and address discriminatory behavior before it affects operations or workplace culture. The training programs developed at DFW had become mandatory for all FAA facilities, with federal investigators using the success at DFW as proof that systematic discrimination could be eliminated through appropriate intervention and sustained oversight. Davis, who had been selected for advanced supervisory training based on his professional response to the discrimination crisis, was implementing similar programs at other TRACON facilities across the region. The key insight is that eliminating discrimination requires proactive intervention rather than reactive responses to complaints, he explained during a training session for supervisors from Houston and Austin Approach Controls. The federal investigation had also revealed that Kyle's discriminatory behavior had been enabled by supervisory systems that failed to recognize or address bias in workplace interactions. The comprehensive reforms included enhanced training for supervisors and accountability measures that ensured discrimination would be identified and addressed immediately. Dr. Santos, the federal civil rights investigator, was presenting the DFW transformation as a model for addressing systematic discrimination in federal agencies throughout the government. The success at DFW TRACON demonstrates that federal agencies can eliminate discriminatory behavior through comprehensive intervention, sustained oversight, and genuine commitment to civil rights compliance, she told a conference of federal oversight officials. The impact extended beyond individual facilities to influence federal policy on workplace discrimination in safety-critical operations. The Department of Transportation had implemented new requirements for all aviation facilities based on the successful reforms at DFW. Kyle Garrett's case had been resolved with consequences that reflected the serious nature of systematic discrimination in federal facilities. His criminal prosecution for civil rights violations had resulted in federal conviction and sentencing that included prison time, substantial fines, and permanent prohibition from federal employment. Mr. Garrett's prosecution demonstrates that discriminatory behavior in federal facilities will be met with serious criminal consequences, announced Department of Justice Civil Rights Division prosecutor Sarah Chen during a press conference about federal enforcement of workplace civil rights laws. The criminal prosecution had sent a clear message throughout federal aviation that discriminatory behavior would not be tolerated and would result in severe personal and professional consequences for perpetrators. But the most significant aspect of the transformation was the cultural change that had made DFW TRACON a model workplace where all controllers could perform their safety-critical responsibilities without facing harassment or discrimination. Martinez, who had witnessed the entire transformation from Kyle's interference through comprehensive reform, reflected on the changes during an interview with Aviation Week magazine. "Working here now feels completely different," he said. "We have genuine professional respect for all controllers based on their competence and performance, not their demographics. It's created an environment where everyone can focus on the safety responsibilities that make our work so important." The facility had achieved what federal investigators had identified as the goal for all aviation operations, a professional work environment where safety responsibilities took precedence over personal biases and where all personnel were treated with dignity and respect. Simone's work at DFW had also led to her promotion to Regional Director of Civil Rights Compliance for all FAA facilities in the Southwest, giving her authority to implement similar reforms across multiple states. The success at DFW proves that systematic discrimination can be eliminated when federal agencies commit to comprehensive intervention and sustained accountability, she explained during her confirmation hearing for the regional position. But the most important test would come when new controllers joined the facility to see if the culture transformation would protect future generations. 1 year after the incident that had transformed DFW TRACON from a facility plagued by systematic discrimination into a model for professional workplace culture, the ripple effects of Simone Washington's investigation continued to reshape air traffic control operations across the United States and internationally. The Federal Aviation Administration's headquarters in Washington, D.C., had become a showcase for the comprehensive reforms that began with one controller's refusal to tolerate discriminatory interference with emergency operations. Administrator Walsh was hosting a delegation of international aviation officials who wanted to understand how American air traffic facilities had achieved such dramatic improvements in workplace culture and operational safety. The transformation that began at DFW TRACON has been implemented at over 400 air traffic facilities across the United States, Administrator Walsh explained to the international delegation. The results demonstrate that eliminating workplace discrimination improves both safety performance and operational efficiency. Simone, now serving as the FAA's National Director of Civil Rights and Workplace Culture, was presenting the comprehensive data that proved systematic discrimination had been eliminated from American air traffic operations through sustained federal oversight and accountability. The statistical evidence is overwhelming, Simone told the international audience. Facilities that implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination programs show 40% reductions in operational errors, 60% improvements in employee retention, and elimination of workplace harassment complaints. The international aviation officials were studying the American model with obvious interest in implementing similar reforms in their own countries. Representatives from the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and European Union aviation authorities had specifically requested detailed briefings on the systematic approach that had proven so successful. Captain Maria Rodriguez from Spain's Aviation Authority asked Simone about the key factors that made the American reforms effective where other approaches had failed. For the critical elements are comprehensive training, independent oversight, swift accountability for violations, and sustained commitment from senior leadership, Simone replied, with the expertise of someone who had personally overseen the transformation of hundreds of facilities. Meanwhile, at DFW TRACON, the facility was preparing to welcome a new class of controllers who would be entering a workplace environment that had been fundamentally transformed since Kyle Garrett's discriminatory behavior had been exposed and eliminated. Controller Williams, who had become the facility's lead trainer for new personnel, was conducting orientation sessions that emphasized professional standards and civil rights compliance from the first day of employment. The culture here is based on competence, professionalism, and mutual respect, she explained to the incoming controllers. We have zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior, and we have systems in place to ensure that everyone can perform their safety responsibilities without harassment or bias. The new controllers included a diverse group of recent Aviation Academy graduates, whose presence demonstrated the success of expanded recruitment efforts that had been implemented as part of the comprehensive reforms. Jennifer Chen, now serving as operations supervisor, was overseeing training programs that had become models for air traffic facilities worldwide. Our training includes not just technical skills, but also professional communication, bias recognition, and inclusive leadership, she explained to visiting supervisors from international aviation authorities. We're training controllers to be both technically excellent and culturally competent. The facility's safety performance had improved dramatically since the elimination of discriminatory behavior, with operational error rates dropping to record lows and communication effectiveness reaching levels that exceeded all previous benchmarks. Davis, who had been promoted to regional training coordinator, was implementing the DFW model at facilities across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Controllers work more effectively when they're not dealing with workplace harassment or discrimination, he reported to federal oversight officials. The correlation between inclusive workplace culture and operational safety is undeniable. The facility had also become a research center for studying the relationship between workplace culture and safety performance in high-stress operational environments. Universities and research institutions were conducting studies that demonstrated the broader applications of the anti-discrimination model. Dr. Patricia Foster from MIT's Aviation Safety Research Center was analyzing data from DFW and other reformed facilities to understand how workplace culture affected decision-making and performance under pressure. The evidence shows that controllers in inclusive, respectful work environments make better decisions during emergencies and communicate more effectively with both colleagues and pilots, Dr. Foster reported in the Journal of Aviation Safety. Kyle Garrett's criminal case had concluded with a federal prison sentence that demonstrated the serious consequences of discriminatory behavior in safety-critical federal facilities. His conviction had been cited in legal precedents that strengthened civil rights enforcement across government agencies. United States v. Garrett established that discriminatory behavior in federal safety facilities constitutes criminal violation of civil rights laws with enhanced penalties due to public safety implications, explained Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Attorney Michael Thompson during a law enforcement training conference. The precedent had been applied to prosecute discriminatory behavior in other federal agencies, including Transportation Security Administration, Coast Guard operations, and Nuclear Regulatory Commission facilities, where safety responsibilities made discrimination particularly dangerous. But the most meaningful impact was visible in the daily operations at DFW TRACON, where controllers from diverse backgrounds worked together with professional respect and shared commitment to aviation safety. Martinez, who had been promoted to shift supervisor, reflected on the transformation during an interview for the FAA's internal magazine. "A year ago, we had talented controllers whose potential was being undermined by discriminatory behavior that created hostile work environments," he said. "Now we have a facility where everyone's contributions are valued and where our diversity of perspectives actually improves our ability to handle complex air traffic situations." The facility's success had attracted national attention from civil rights organizations, professional aviation groups, and federal agencies seeking to implement similar reforms in their own operations. The final test would prove that the culture transformation had created lasting change that would protect air traffic safety for generations to come. 2 years after Simone Washington's courageous stand against discriminatory interference with emergency air traffic operations, DFW TRACON had become an international symbol of how systematic discrimination could be eliminated through comprehensive intervention and sustained commitment to civil rights compliance. The facility was hosting the International Air Traffic Controllers Association annual conference, with representatives from 47 countries gathering to study the transformative reforms that had made American air traffic operations a global model for professional workplace culture. Simone, now recognized internationally as a leading expert in eliminating workplace discrimination from safety-critical operations, was delivering the keynote address to an audience of air traffic professionals from around the world. The journey that began with one controller's refusal to accept discriminatory treatment has become proof that individuals can create systematic change when they have the courage to document injustice, demand accountability, and work for institutional transformation, she told the assembled international audience. Her presentation included comprehensive data showing that the reforms implemented across American air traffic facilities had achieved unprecedented improvements in safety performance, operational efficiency, and workplace satisfaction. The elimination of discriminatory behavior hasn't just created better work environments, Simone explained. It has produced measurable improvements in aviation safety, with error rates at historic lows and communication effectiveness at record highs. In the audience, Kyle Garrett's former colleagues listened with professional pride to recognition of their facility's transformation. Controllers who had witnessed systematic discrimination being replaced by professional respect and inclusive culture understood that they had participated in changes that would influence aviation safety for decades. Controller Williams, who had become an international speaker on workplace discrimination in aviation, addressed the conference about the personal impact of the reforms. "Before these changes, I came to work every day wondering if my competence would be questioned, my decisions challenged, or my contributions minimized because of my gender and race," she told the international audience. "Now I come to work focused entirely on the safety responsibilities that make our profession so important." Her words resonated with air traffic controllers from countries where similar discrimination continued to undermine both workplace culture and operational safety. The conference included presentations by controllers from multiple facilities where the American model had been implemented, demonstrating that the transformation achieved at DFW could be replicated across different cultural and organizational contexts. Jennifer Chen, now serving as Regional Operations Director, presented data showing that facilities implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination programs consistently outperformed those that had not addressed workplace bias. The correlation between inclusive workplace culture and operational excellence is statistically undeniable, she reported to the international audience. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's operationally dangerous. The American model had influenced international aviation standards, with the International Civil Aviation Organization implementing new requirements for workplace culture and civil rights compliance in air traffic facilities worldwide. Davis, who had been selected to coordinate international implementation of anti-discrimination programs, was working with aviation authorities in 12 countries to adapt the American reforms to local legal and cultural contexts. The fundamental principles, comprehensive training, independent oversight, swift accountability, and sustained leadership commitment, are universally applicable, he explained during workshops with international aviation officials. The success of the reforms had also influenced federal policy beyond aviation, with other safety-critical agencies implementing similar programs to eliminate discriminatory behavior from operations where public safety depended on professional competence and effective teamwork. Department of Homeland Security, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and Federal Emergency Management Agency facilities had all adopted modified versions of the air traffic control anti-discrimination model. Kyle Garrett's case had become a landmark in federal civil rights enforcement, with his conviction and imprisonment serving as precedent for prosecuting discriminatory behavior in safety-critical federal operations. The Garrett precedent has fundamentally changed how federal agencies address workplace discrimination, explained Civil Rights Division prosecutor Sarah Chen during a legal education conference. It established that discriminatory behavior in safety facilities constitutes criminal endangerment of public welfare. But the most meaningful legacy was visible in the daily operations at DFW TRACON, where a new generation of controllers was working in an environment where professional competence was the only criterion for respect and advancement. The facility's newest controllers included recent graduates from expanded recruitment programs that had specifically sought to diversify the air traffic profession while maintaining the highest standards of technical competence. Among them was Controller Ashley Thompson, a 23-year-old African-American woman whose presence at the radar scope represented the success of efforts to create truly inclusive professional environments. "I chose air traffic control because I wanted a career where my skills and judgment could protect public safety," Thompson said during an interview for the FAA's recruitment materials. "Working here, I know that my contributions are valued based on my competence and professionalism, not my appearance or background." Her words reflected the cultural transformation that had made air traffic control attractive to talented individuals from all backgrounds, strengthening the profession through expanded diversity of perspectives and experiences. Simone concluded her keynote address by reflecting on the broader implications of successful discrimination elimination in safety-critical professions. "The transformation we've achieved in air traffic control demonstrates that systematic discrimination is not inevitable," she told the international audience. When individuals have the courage to stand up for what's right, when institutions commit to comprehensive change, and when society demands accountability for discriminatory behavior, we can create work environments where everyone's potential is realized and where public safety is protected by the best possible professional performance. The standing ovation that followed reflected international recognition that the American air traffic control transformation represented more than workplace reform. It represented proof that systematic discrimination could be eliminated through sustained commitment to civil rights and professional excellence. As the conference concluded, delegates from around the world committed to implementing similar programs in their own countries, creating a global movement toward inclusive aviation operations that would protect both workers' rights and public safety. The facility tour that followed allowed international visitors to observe the daily operations of an air traffic control center where discrimination had been eliminated and professional excellence flourished. They witnessed Controller Martinez coordinating complex weather deviations with calm expertise, Controller Chen managing busy arrival sequences with precision timing, and Controller Williams providing emergency assistance to a pilot reporting mechanical problems, all working together with mutual respect and shared commitment to aviation safety. This is what air traffic control looks like when discrimination is eliminated, Simone explained to the international delegation. Professional competence is the only measure of performance. Diversity of perspectives strengthens decision-making, and workplace culture supports rather than undermines operational safety. The transformation was complete, but its impact would continue expanding as other facilities, agencies, and countries implemented reforms based on the model that had begun with one controller's refusal to accept discriminatory treatment during an emergency. As the international visitors departed, carrying plans to implement anti-discrimination programs in their own facilities, the controllers at DFW TRACON returned to their normal operations, managing one of the world's busiest airspace sectors with professional excellence that reflected their transformed workplace culture. The radar screens continued to display aircraft, moving through complex three-dimensional patterns. Pilots continued to depend on precise vectors and clear communications, and passengers continued to trust that their flights would be managed by competent professionals working in environments that supported their best performance. But now that performance was enhanced by workplace culture that eliminated barriers to professional achievement and created inclusive environments where all controllers could contribute their skills and judgment to protecting aviation safety. Simone returned to her office, where files on her desk contained requests from facilities around the world, seeking assistance in implementing similar transformations. The work that had begun with documenting Kyle Garrett's discriminatory behavior had evolved into a global mission to eliminate workplace discrimination from safety-critical operations. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Ashley Thompson, the young controller, whose presence represented the success of expanded recruitment efforts. "Thank you for creating a workplace where I can focus on being the best controller I can be, instead of worrying about being accepted for who I am." The message captured the essence of what had been achieved, not just the elimination of discriminatory behavior, but the creation of professional environments where talent could flourish without barriers based on identity or background. As aircraft continued their carefully choreographed movements through DFW's airspace, guided by controllers whose diverse perspectives and professional competence had been enhanced rather than undermined by inclusive workplace culture, the legacy of Simone Washington's courage continued to protect aviation safety and inspire continued progress toward equality and justice in professional environments. The transformation was complete, but the work continued, because in a world where discrimination still existed in countless forms and institutions, there would always be more barriers to overcome, more systems to reform, and more individuals to inspire, with the knowledge that courage and commitment could create lasting change. The phone call that exposed systematic discrimination had ultimately elevated air traffic safety standards worldwide. The bias that was meant to silence a competent professional had instead amplified her voice across international aviation. The system that had tried to exclude her based on assumptions had been fundamentally transformed to protect and empower future generations of controllers. And somewhere in control towers and approach facilities around the world, Air traffic controllers of all backgrounds were managing aircraft with the professional respect and inclusive culture that every safety-critical operation deserved. The living, breathing legacy of one woman who had refused to accept anything less than equality and had transformed an entire industry in the process. The aircraft continued their precise movements through carefully managed airspace, guided by controllers whose competence was measured only by their professional skills, whose contributions were valued regardless of their background, and whose workplace culture supported the highest standards of aviation safety that protect millions of passengers every day. In control facilities from Dallas to Denver, from Houston to Los Angeles, and in countries across the globe where similar reforms had been implemented, the principles that Simone Washington had fought to establish continued to ensure that aviation safety was protected by the best possible professional performance, free from the barriers and biases that had once undermined both individual achievement and collective safety. Thank you to everyone who typed respect, and to all who shared their locations from around the world. Your global support for workplace equality and aviation safety means everything. If these stories of professional courage inspire you, please subscribe to join our community and help us share more incredible tales of how individual bravery can transform entire industries. Until next time, keep believing in the power of standing up for professional dignity and safety standards that protect us all.